Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Sheltering in place in San Francisco, U.S. deaths from the coronavirus soaring past 1,000. Meantime, Italy having its biggest jump in new cases of the virus in 5 days. We're going to take you to a press conference at the White House scheduled to start any minute now. President Trump expected to be there. Meantime, I want to talk about markets. Stocks surging for the third straight day. Investors increasingly optimistic as this $2 trillion stimulus plan continues to clear hurdles in Congress. I want to bring in Romaine Bostick, our What'd You Miss co-anchor. And Romaine, stocks surging even more than they did in the last 2 days.
Yeah.
What's the move for?
Yeah, look, when the markets are efficient and the pricing is efficient, it's basically a forward pricing mechanism, Emily. You know this. And what the market is pricing in right now, they're looking beyond this current quarter, Q1. They're looking beyond the recession that everyone predicts that we're going to have in Q2. And they're looking ahead to Q3 and Q4 and what they believe is going to be a recovery. You saw that reflected in the S&P 500, moving higher by about 6% on the day, as did the other main indices, like the NASDAQ composite. We even saw small caps getting into the rally as well, up about 6%. You saw those big cap tech names, again, Emily, Microsoft, Apple, up 5-6%, Amazon, Intel, Alphabet, the whole gang. And this was basically investors starting to just nibble around the edges and say, maybe the worst might potentially be over. Maybe this $2 trillion in fiscal stimulus and the trillions more in Fed support, that might be enough to facilitate a recovery in the second half of the year, Emily.
Good news for the FANG gang, Romaine. Hang on, I want to bring in Kathy Wood, ARK Invest CEO and CIO. Kathy, good to have you with us. Let's talk about these big tech names. You've got investments across a lot of these companies. I want to start with Facebook and Alphabet. These are companies that might be seeing a surge in traffic, but there's a big danger of advertising plummeting for them this year. You've got Cowen saying that Facebook and Google could collectively lose or see a $44 billion less in revenue this year. How concerned are you about that?
Well, we are a long-term investor, so our time horizon is 5 years, and over a 5-year time horizon, we think Facebook and Google probably will be stronger after all of this because of how many more eyeballs and how much time they have attracted.
So what about Apple then? You know, this is a company that, they're talking about potentially reopening stores in the second half of April, but stores are closed mostly around the world. This 5G phone is delayed. You got to think that iPhone demand is going to be slower this year, and considerably so.
Absolutely. Short term, we're going to see a lot of slowdowns, a lot of weakness. It's interesting, though, in China, they are starting to rev back up. We've heard that Apple's supply chain is getting back to normal in China. China really is making an effort to get back to normal. They've got a more command and control economy, so they can do that. So the supply chain problems, we think, will work themselves out. But you're right, the virus still has to move across the United States. We haven't even begun to see the worst of it. And so this is going to be a problem for sales going forward.
So, Kathy, we know that this is going to be a problem, at least in the short to medium term. Once we get a little bit more longer term, do you think we're going to start to see a little bit more capital spending by some of these big companies, the companies that have basically come out already and said they're either suspending their CapEx plans or at least scaling them back pretty significantly this year?
Well, we've been looking at capital spending for the last 18 months, and it's been pretty skimpy. Businesses generally have been scared by two things. First, the China-U.S. trade conflict, and then last year we got into inverted yield curves and the fears of recession, and now we have the coronavirus. So we think capital spending has been too low for too long. And actually, we do believe that the rubber band is stretching and that capital spending could be one of the big upside surprises toward the end of this year and certainly into next year. We also think a lot of companies have been skimping on inventories. We went into this with consumer spending both in China and in the U.S. much stronger than I think businesses had expected them to be.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they had been taking down their inventory. So we think there are a lot of reasons we could see a very strong recovery next year.
With regards to the inventory issue, though, do you think that psychologically we're going to see a shift in how some of these companies think? Because, I mean, the whole idea here was to keep those inventory levels low, do more sort of build to order or, order to order, however you want to phrase it. And that was a way for companies to sort of keep their costs down. You think they're willing to shift to a little bit more of a heavy inventory model?
I think perhaps that, and maybe even more so, producing closer to the end consumers. And we're in our focus on disruptive innovation. We're trying to find solutions to problems, our companies are. And we're seeing 3D printing as a solution to that, quick turn manufacturing, so Proto Labs, Stratasys, Materialize. So our portfolios are filled with names that are, better, cheaper, faster, more productive, more creative. And so we think they're going to do very well throughout this, or on the other side of this crisis.
Kathy, you've been really optimistic about Tesla. We've just learned that 2 Tesla employees tested positive for the coronavirus. We don't know exactly where these employees are, but the company has suspended production in Fremont, California, suspended production in Buffalo, New York. Some of these facilities might be working on ventilators. We're trying to figure out where this ventilator production is actually happening. But how concerned are you about a disruption in Tesla production, and what does that mean for the company this year?
Yeah, the ventilator production is going to take place in New York State. Actually, Elon Musk tweeted about it yesterday and said, he and Tesla would do anything that they could do to help New York as we're going through this crisis. And so I think he now understands how serious this is. Yes, Fremont, they're down to bare bones production. I think most factories in the San Francisco area, in the New York area, we're all going to find that there are coronavirus cases. On the other hand, in China, what we're seeing from Tesla and from the Chinese government, very interestingly, is the day after Lunar New Year ended, Tesla was producing, and the government was helping it with by providing masks and other protective equipment, sanitizers, dorm rooms so that the employees could separate from one another, and catering. So I have a feeling we're going to see some upside surprises out of China when it comes to Tesla. And it would be amazing if perhaps they started exporting from China. That said, we know that the Chinese government is stimulating auto sales, giving more incentives, especially for electric cars. So we think China is going to be somewhat of an offset to what's going on here.
All right, interesting. Thanks so much, Kathy Wood of ARK Invest. Always good to have you here on the show. Romaine Bostick, what'd you miss? Thank you as well. Coming up, with so many millions of people working from home around the world, how big a security risk is this? We're going to talk to George Kurtz, the CEO of Crowdstrike, coming up. This is Bloomberg. Millions of people are now working from home, and every time they access a corporate network, that is another gateway for hackers to attack. Joining me now, the CEO of Crowdstrike, George Kurtz, to talk about just how vulnerable we are in this moment. George, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, are you seeing an increase in hack attacks right now, whether it's because people are working from home or it's phishing or ransomware? And if so, how big an increase are you seeing?
Well, great to be here, and we absolutely are. If you look at any time where there's chaos in the world, we typically see attacks increase, and I couldn't think of a more chaotic time than now. We're certainly seeing increases in phishing attacks with lure documents that talk about COVID-19, that talk about potential cures, that talk about financial assistance, and we're also seeing ransomware. This is a time when we're most vulnerable. You think about our hospitals and governments to be attacked by ransomware. So we're seeing that across the board, and it's a time where people need to be vigilant and continue to monitor their security systems.
So are you saying that from a cybersecurity perspective, we're more vulnerable than we've ever been in recent history?
Well, when we think about the vulnerability, most people are not home and people are out of the office. And typically what we've seen, prior to COVID-19 is that during the holiday season, when people are off, the attacks increase. This is the perfect opportunity for people to be out of the office, right? When no one's watching their systems, which is one of the reasons like why companies like CrowdStrike have continued to do well, because we provide that 24 by 7 monitoring as part of our overall security solution.
Now, the World Health Organization has reported that they've been targeted, and yet some of these hacker groups have promised they won't target hospital sites, testing centers, healthcare organizations. And yet, are you seeing that as well?
Well, I think it depends on the group. I mean, you have to look at the business they're in. There's no honor among thieves, right? So someone may say they won't target, and someone else will. I think you can't rely on someone's word who's trying to break in and extort you from a ransomware perspective, which is important to have the very best security technologies in place to stop these attacks. And a big part of that is using technologies that are powered by artificial intelligence to identify attacks that have never been seen before.
What about all of this video conferencing that's happening, whether it's Zoom or Skype or Google Hangouts or FaceTime or House Party, any number of ways that folks are connecting, whether for home or for work? How protected are these conversations?
Well, when we think about these technologies, thank God they exist because they allow us to do what we're doing in a remote workforce. When we think about a remote user, and we've spent a bunch of time with our customers and actually provided some additional capabilities for them to protect their home users, as an example, there's risk because in a home user system, it's not monitored. But at the same time, you may be using that because you're forced to log into a company VPN and you could potentially expose that network. So our customers have taken advantage of the Falcon for Home program that we've put together to protect those home users in a time of crisis.
Now, a point that's been raised is that some of these hackers, some of these bad actors could make their way in and then lie in wait for weeks, for months, and that we might not know they're there. How long will it be before we realize the full extent of the fallout here?
Well, it could be some time, and that's the problem with many corporate networks. They don't have really good visibility to understand how long the adversary is on their network. And that's an area where it could be 90 days, 200 days before anyone actually discovers them, if they're lucky enough to discover them, which is a big part of having good visibility across the network and endpoint technology. So it's just a matter of time. We've seen organizations where we've responded to a potential breach. We weren't in there beforehand. They called us up and said, "Hey, help us out." And the adversary's been there for a year or 2 years in some cases. So it all depends on the organization, but I'm sure we're going to see some fallout from this over a period of time.
Meantime, because of the situation, you've got lawmakers pushing for more vote by mail and more mobile voting. And yet critics are saying we're just not ready for that, especially when it comes to something as important as an election. What do you think?
Well, at some point, we're going to be all electronic in terms of voting, and it's going to be a process as we work ourselves up to that. Maybe this is a way to accelerate it. I think we've seen various states have some challenges as they put that together. But I think over time, I think everyone ultimately over a number of years is going to move to all electronic voting. And it's critical that we actually have the security of those systems locked down so that they can't be manipulated by external parties or outside organizations, some of the nation state actors that are out there. So, from my perspective, at least for now, a vote in by mail is fine. I mean, we've done that for a long period of time. And I think in a chaotic situation that we have today, we're just going to have to go back to the old school methods and hopefully just get through it.
Meantime, we're already hearing, from intelligence sources that the Russians are trying to sow discord and disinformation as a result of the coronavirus to take advantage, as you said earlier, of the chaos. Are there any state actors that you are most or more concerned about at this point?
Well, I think at this point, we can all agree it's a worldwide pandemic. And whenever there's a worldwide incident, every government is interested in gaining intelligence information and understanding what's happening. If you think about the ability to understand what a country's doing, how they're going to respond, are there companies that actually have a cure for this disease? Are there technologies that can help lessen the impact? These are all things that countries want to understand, and they're going to be very, very active across the board in trying to identify and gather this information.
Meantime, George, we're getting more breaking headlines that, the U.S. is now poised to have the most coronavirus cases in the world. And obviously, the U.S., always a target. How much does this concern you, knowing that the United States still hasn't reached its full testing capacity, and President Trump is already talking about potentially reopening the economy in 2 weeks?
Well, I'm certainly not a doctor, and I just have to observe what's happening, and it's really a terrible situation that we're all in. I think, like everyone else, and everyone is just sympathetic to small businesses and people that are out of work. We're sympathetic to the impact of families, and we all want to get back to our lives, but we have to understand the risk this particular disease creates for everyone, and we just have to follow the right guidelines. So, from our standpoint at CrowdStrike, we put our employees all remote weeks ago. We've been fortunate enough to be able to operate as a remote company for many years since I started it. But many other organizations are not, and there's a huge economic impact. So, of course, we have to balance that impact with the health of all the people across the globe, and hopefully we can push through, and we can get through this epidemic and get people back to health and back to work.
All right, George Kurtz, CEO of Crowdstrike, thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, we're going to be talking about WeWork, a company particularly in a tough spot as a result of the coronavirus and all of these millions of people working from home. We are also going to take you live to that press conference at the White House. President Trump has said he will be there. This as the United States is now poised to have the most coronavirus cases worldwide. We'll be right back. This is Bloomberg. First, a botched IPO, and now the coronavirus. Things are only looking worse for WeWork, the workspace sharing company. Joining us now, Ellen Hewitt, who has been covering WeWork's struggles. Ellen, you got a lot of businesses out there doing layoffs, reevaluating, but particularly interesting for a company that runs shared workspaces when we're all supposed to be self-quarantining. What is WeWork saying about just how hard this will hit their business?
So today, actually, the most recent news is that the chairman and the new CEO put out a letter to their bond investors saying that because of the coronavirus, they do not expect to hit their 2020 targets, probably a similar thing that many companies are also saying. But it's against the backdrop of, as you mentioned, the coronavirus striking at perhaps what is the central selling point of WeWork, right? Like they used to say, our workspaces are more exciting. This is a place where you can come and work near other people, and that was a huge selling point. It just feels like in the future that's going to be a really different way that people think about co-working spaces, and in fact, maybe the whole concept of open office or shared offices may be reevaluated in the years to come. And on a shorter term basis, they face this issue of more than a quarter of their members last year were month-to-month members, which means that they could cancel their contracts going forward or choose not to renew. And beyond that, I've talked to other people in the co-working industry, and they say they're preparing for many of their customers, especially small businesses, to come to them and say, hey, I know we have a contract, but we can't afford rent this month, or we're not going to pay. That's something that WeWork is definitely going to face in the months ahead.
Meantime, Ellen, SoftBank was, of course, a huge investor in WeWork. SoftBank has been taking some hits as a result of the coronavirus-inspired panic as well. How does that impact WeWork's ability to weather some of this uncertainty?
Yeah, there's actually growing tension now between WeWork and SoftBank. As you might remember, SoftBank came in with this big bailout package last fall after the failed IPO and after WeWork made clear that they needed money to stay afloat. Now that things have gone a little south, SoftBank is threatening to unravel parts of that deal from last fall, in particular, a tender offer of around $3 billion in which SoftBank had agreed to buy back shares from many investors and employees, including Adam Newman. And even though this tender offer, if it doesn't go through, it doesn't affect the amount of money directly in WeWork's coffers. It does have an effect on how much cash they have because there's an outstanding $1.1 billion in a debt financing that is contingent on the completion of the tender offer. So there's quite a lot of tension right now between the leadership of SoftBank and the leadership of WeWork over what exactly the terms might be of completing this tender offer, which many early employees have told me they are looking forward to, mostly because they feel like it's their last chance to try to get recuperate some of the value of their shares, which has gone down drastically in the last year.
Ellen, as we've been speaking, New York City Mayor Bill Deblasio has been giving a press conference. Obviously, New York is now ground zero for coronavirus cases. Deblasio just now saying that he believes 500,000 New Yorkers will end up unemployed as a result of this. WeWork is, of course, a global company, but its headquarters and the heart of its operations are in New York City. What does that mean?
So it's interesting because, as you mentioned, WeWork, for example, for many years has been the biggest commercial tenant in Manhattan. They have tons of locations in New York, and I'm already hearing from a lot of members about how frequently they're getting emails from the people who run their WeWork offices saying, hey, we had another report of a member who tested positive for COVID-19, and we need to shut down the office for a day to have a deep clean. It's bringing out this, especially in New York, this heated debate between WeWork and its members over whether WeWork offices should stay open during this time, because many members say, hey, we've been, required to shelter in place. We cannot, the government is saying stay home. We can't access our offices, so we shouldn't be paying for them. Meanwhile, WeWork is arguing in return that it is they're responsible for keeping their offices open because some of their members are providers of essential services. And so there seems to be this tension as well between WeWork members and WeWork, the company, over whether WeWork should even be operating their offices right now. WeWork has allowed all of their employees to work from home, but they are not requiring it. And so they still seem to be trying to thread the needle of staying open and justifying why they're staying open, even as many members have talked to me about how they've made calls to WeWork trying to say, you should be refunding us. We shouldn't be paying for this service right now.